Welcome all. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're going to wait a couple minutes here to allow folks to get settled, get their audio set and their video set up. So thank you so much for your patience. Thanks again for joining us tonight. We'll make.
Hi, Steve Spickard.
It's always great to see familiar names. All right, we're going to wait maybe 30 more seconds here. Looks like there's a couple more people that are hoping to join in and get them situated. Okay, I think we are ready to get started. So thank you again for joining us this evening. We're here obviously to hear about the housing element update process for the city of Piedmont. This is our first workshop. But before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Kevin Jackson of the city to do a welcome.
Thank you, Dave, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the December 2nd community workshop for Piedmont's Housing Element Update. I'm Kevin Jackson, Piedmont's Planning and Building Director. And just please note that the focus of the workshop tonight is not about specific sites or sites in general. The intent is to consider Piedmont as a whole as we work together to develop a common understanding of the specific housing needs in Piedmont, including invisible housing issues like cost burdens, risks of homelessness and poverty. And two, to hear from the community about ways that the city could grow and respond to housing needs. And three, receive comments from our engagement strategies and how to ensure a diverse representation. And finally, four, to provide for a dialogue on community priorities, identifying shared priorities, as well as how to learn from those with different perspectives. And we want to give everyone attending the workshop tonight an equal chance to provide comment within the limited time frame of the workshop. In a moment, Dave Javed will provide you with instructions on how to use Zoom's chat function to send your comments to us. And then we'll aggregate those comments and try to provide responses later in the meeting, just prior to the breakout rooms. And if you attend this workshop, through its conclusion at or near 7 p.m., you'll have a chance to win a $50 gift card from Grand Lake Ace Hardware. How about that? But first, I'd like to introduce the team running tonight's workshop. We have me, as well as managing the Housing Element Update project is Senior Planner Pierce McDonald-Powell. You're probably all familiar with her. Thank you very much, Pierce. And then the consulting team includes from Lisa Wise Consulting, David Bergman, Catherine Slama, and Stefano Rikiki. And then from Plan to Place, Dave Javed, as well as Paul Kronzer. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to the chair of both the Planning Commission and the Housing Advisory Committee, Ronnie Batra, because she has a few remarks she'd like to make. Go ahead, Ronnie.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you to all the many members of our community that are taking time out during a busy time in the holiday season to engage in this really important and meaty issue. I'd like to just make a couple of very brief remarks before we get started. First, I want to share some good news. Some of you may have seen in the paper today that the Southern California News Group, which is an independent news organization, released its third annual housing report card, where they crunched the numbers to evaluate every city in California in terms of how well they're meeting their housing production goals. Most of the cities in California received a grade of C or D, and there were quite a few that failed the test entirely. I'm really proud to say that the city of Piedmont received a grade of A, along with extra credit for producing housing on the more affordable end of the spectrum. And one of the more important factors in achieving that goal was through an innovative program that Piedmont implemented during the current kind of winding down housing cycle to waive parking and unit size requirements for low-income deed-restricted ADUs. And some residents did utilize that program to produce deed-restricted ADUs, and that contributed to us accomplishing our goals and achieving the letter grade of A, which really required producing not just housing overall, but housing on the lower end of the income spectrum to improve accessibility. So I share this good news, not just to pat ourselves on the back and celebrate, which we should do, but also to highlight something that we all know and need to remember as we engage in this work together, which is that good public policy comes from robust and respectful engagement from all parts of the community. And this community is already filled with examples of what we can accomplish together when we're willing to have those difficult conversations and be creative in developing solutions. Housing policy addresses questions of economic and racial equity, and also involves some technical and sometimes really Byzantine and complicated and sometimes, things that don't make sense, mandates that come down from the state. And we've got to sort of wade through all of that and figure out how does it affect us here in Piedmont, and how do we utilize these guardrails to achieve goals. So for all of these reasons, these can be challenging conversations. And so I just encourage everyone that's engaged here tonight, that may watch later, that may choose to share their input in other ways, to remember that you are all subject matter experts, that even though this is technical and complicated, as members of this community, you all have a stake in the outcomes of this process. And so I want to encourage you all to be engaged. I'm preaching to the choir a bit, because those of you that are here tonight are already engaged. And so I want to thank you for that, and encourage you to bring your perspective, particularly in the breakout groups tonight. Share your ideas and assume the positive intent of others when listening to what they have to say. So thanks again. And with that, I believe I need to hand the baton back to Kevin.
I'll actually take it from here. Thank you so much, Chair Batra and Kevin, for that great introduction. Again, I'm Dave Javid with Plan to Place, part of the consultant team. Great to see you all here this evening. I wanted to quickly give you an overview of the agenda. We do have a packed agenda, but most of it is around giving you a very quick update about the housing element, what it entails, where we are in the process, and where we're headed. But most importantly, it's to provide plenty of space to hear from you all this evening. We will have an opportunity after we do the overview and go through some of the frequently asked questions and some of the engagement overview of where we've been, to have some Q&A with you all, so that we can kind of hear from you, and that'll be done mainly through chat. But then we're going to move into small groups, where we're going to have a chance to dive in a little bit deeper and give you each equal space to provide your input before we come back together and do a short report out of what we've heard, and then talk about next steps and hopefully get you on your way right at 7 o'clock. To respect your time. And as I mentioned, there's a couple different ways we're going to facilitate the discussion. As of right now, the chat function is available. So when we go through the presentation, you'll notice that you can send chat directly to all of the co-hosts. We're going to ask in particular if you can send that chat to Pierce McDonald, member of the city, who's going to be tracking all of the chat comments and making sure that we have them all ready to address those that we can during the Q&A. Others that we don't get to, we'll definitely have opportunity to report back on with a summary of the meeting, and they'll also be moved up to the FAQs as well, so that we have the ongoing dialogue with you all as we move through the process. I also have here the raise your hand function. We'll be using that when we get into the small groups. You have an opportunity to raise your hand virtually, and that'll give the facilitators an opportunity to unmute you so that we can hear from you verbally as well as chat in the small groups as well. So just make it as easy as possible for you all to contribute here tonight. So with that, the first thing that we're going to do with you all is just to get a sense of who is in the room with us. We'd like to do a quick demographics poll, and we've been using this great tool called Mentimeter, where it's an online resource that is a little bit more dynamic than the polling that we might do through Zoom. So what I'm going to ask you to do here is go to mentee.com, MENTI.com, and then you'll plug in this code, and this code will come back up again shortly. It's 74596324. And or there's a QR code on the screen. You could also bring your phone up, your camera on your phone up to the screen, and you'll see that little Mentee pop up. You can press that. That'll take you directly to the site as well. And once you're there, you'll see the home screen pop up, and you won't be able to move forward until I get there and help navigate us through the poll. So I appreciate your patience. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing screen and go ahead and bring up that Mentee poll, and we'll go ahead and take that poll here together. So thank you for your patience. Go ahead and get this started. Excellent. I see a bunch of you already on there, which is great to see.
Dave, for those people who just joined the Mentee poll, you want to give them that code again? There we go.
Yep, it's up on the screen. Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, so I did notice a couple people just joined the meeting. Welcome. We're about to launch into this first poll, just a demographics poll, to get a good sense of who's in the meeting with us. So I'm going to wait here just one more second. I see a bunch of people already logging in. But either go to mentee.com. It could be on a second screen on your laptop or computer and or on your phone. And then you dial in the code 74596324 and or use the QR code on the screen with your phone, and that'll take you directly to the poll. So, and that code is going to remain at the top of the screen the whole time. So I'm going to go ahead and launch in. For those that are getting on a little bit late, no problem. You'll still have an opportunity to provide your input as well. So the first thing we're going to do, just to make sure that everyone's engaged and able to get onto the poll, is do a very quick, fun icebreaker. And we're going to ask you what you love about Piedmont. And you'll see once you start typing in your answers, you'll notice words popping up on the screen. Hopefully it's going to create a really fun word cloud. Trees, awesome. Parks, neighbors, community, excellent. You all are quickly getting the hang of this. This is great. You all have seen this used in meetings before. Word clouds are just a great way of quickly gathering information. Those words that get the most number of inputs tend to show up a little bit larger. In this case, it looks like you all are all about community, neighbors, trees, walkability, schools, beauty. Fantastic. Excellent. Looks like everyone is quickly getting the hang of this. This is great. So with that, and if you haven't had a chance to, again, you'll have a chance to go through all of these questions at your own speed at any time. So I'm going to go ahead and move us forward in the interest of time. Great input still coming in. The people, family, aesthetics, smooth paving, the full board. That's fantastic. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and now launch into the actual demographics questions. And I'm going to ask a series of questions, and these are going to be questions that we're going to ask at every single meeting. Again, it's just to make sure that we get a sense of who we're meeting with here tonight, and then at every subsequent event that we go to make sure that we course correct if needed as we go through the process, so that we connect with every segment of the community, and hopefully provide an opportunity for everyone to be involved in this process that wants to be. So this first question is obviously, where do you live? As expected, vast majority of you live in Piedmont, which is to be expected since this is Piedmont-centric housing element update. Fantastic, so vast majority there. So we'll move on to the next question. Where do you work? And this is whether you work in Piedmont, including maybe working remotely, which almost all of us do these days, not in Piedmont, and on down the road. Okay, excellent. Looks like actually a pretty good cross section of folks working both in Piedmont, outside the county, and or retired. Excellent. And again, all of this information that we gather here tonight will be included in the summary report, so you all get a chance to see that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and move on now. Next question is, which of the following describes why you decided to attend tonight's workshop? And you could select all that apply. It's simply if you want to know more about the update process, want to know more about housing and how to obtain it in Piedmont, you're concerned about housing, you support housing. And again, as expected, there's a vast majority of folks here this evening that support housing and want to know more about the update process. Excellent. Okay, and then move us along here to the next question. We want to just quickly ask if you participated in any other events, and we'll talk a little bit about what events have happened thus far throughout the process and what's upcoming. But this is great to get a sense of your familiarity with the housing element update process. It looks like just over half of you have attended other events. Great to know. And you'll get to hear a little bit more for those that haven't. You get to know a lot more about the housing element update process here tonight. Next question is, what is your current housing situation? Whether you own a home, rent a home, live with family and friends, or other. Okay. Looks like a majority of folks this evening here with us do own a home. Very fortunate. All right, that's very good to know as we move through this process. Excellent. And we'll get to dive in a little bit more about those that maybe fit in some of these other categories as we get into the small groups. And what type of housing do you live in? Whether a home, duplex, townhome, condo, apartment, ADU, or accessory dwelling unit. Given that most of you own a home, not a surprise, most of you live in a house. Great to see. Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. We have 2 more questions here, then we're going to get started in the presentation. We wanted to get a sense of which of the following categories you might identify with. That's from Hispanic, Latinx, on down the road. Black, Indigenous, or persons of color. Excellent. This is excellent. And this is an opportunity, obviously, to provide more than one if you do fit in more than one of those categories. And it looks like we have a very interesting cross-section of folks who are here with us this evening. Excellent. Fantastic. This is really, really great to see. All right. Great. So one final question before we move into the presentation. And then we are going to do one more poll with you all as well before we launch into the small groups. Wow, this is really great to see. Thank you all for taking the time. Excellent. And then finally, this is a common question we ask as well, is about household income. Just again, this is almost like a census type data question that's typically asked to get a sense of household income. Excellent. Okay. Good to see. Great. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this screen and bring back up the presentation. Thank you again so much for taking that exercise. I hope you had a good time doing it. We'll get to use this tool again here shortly as we do a second poll, but I'm going to go ahead and bring the presentation back up. And I'm going to hand it over to Catherine. Catherine, over to you.
Great, thanks, Dave. Thank you for having us tonight. Thank you for everyone who's joined us. As Chair Batra mentioned, it is a busy time of year, so we really appreciate everyone's attendance tonight. As Kevin mentioned, my name is Catherine Slama. I'm a senior associate at LWC. We are part of the consultant team working with the City of Piedmont on the housing element update for the 6th cycle. So jumping right in, we'll do a quick overview of housing elements. So housing element law, as enacted in 1969, really comes at the time of the civil rights movement and a federal and state understanding of the relationship of equity and affordable housing. Housing element law mandates that as part of the city's general plan, the long-term blueprint for a city, communities in California must plan for housing at all economic segments of the community. And where possible, modify local policies or regulations which may limit the construction of a variety of types of housing. So as these policies may or may not have originally been designed in the past to intentionally or unintentionally prevent housing development, which impacted housing available to certain races, classes, genders, families, or now other protected classifications. Next slide, please. So housing element law has continued to evolve since the late 1960s, continually morphing to address new statewide housing challenges as they arise, such as housing for persons with disabilities, the homeless, and to respond to the ever-increasing and worsening housing crisis in California. Providing opportunities for fair housing and reducing constraints is not a one-time action. To ensure that communities are staying on top of local issues, the state requires that housing elements be updated every 8 years To ensure compliance with state law, the Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, reviews all housing elements. Housing elements that do not follow all laws must be refined and revised and resubmitted to HCD for review. Next slide, please. Housing element laws, requirements, and guidance is coordinated across a variety of local, regional, and state entities, including the Association of Bay Area Governments, which is, or ABAG, the Council of Government for the 9-county Bay Area region, which includes Alameda County. ABAG sets the fair housing targets for all cities in the Bay Area, including Piedmont. So in addition to compliance with state housing laws and the setting for fair housing goals and policies, the city must plan for how to accommodate 587 units at a variety of income levels over the next 8 years. This is called the city's Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA, RHNA, and it's the city's fair share of the total number of housing units projected in the Bay Area, which is over 440,000 for the next 8 years. For more information on ABAG, the RHNA, and housing element requirements, go to piedmontishome.org and check out the informational videos. The housing element update for the sixth cycle, covering the years 2023 through 2031, kicked off in May of this year and will run through the spring of 2023. We are at the beginning stages of outreach and technical analysis, and we'll present some of those results for you tonight. At the end of 2022 and then through 2023, we'll continue this analysis. On the next slide, you'll see that into the next year, we'll be aligning major document milestones with a variety of outreach activities, which Dave Javid will run through in a moment. But the idea here is that all of the deliverables and milestones align with public opportunity for input, as there will be multiple drafts of the housing element, which will all be available for public review. But now I'm going to hand it over to Kevin Jackson to talk about some frequently asked questions.
Thank you, Catherine. And yes, so I'd like to address 3 questions that we frequently hear from people out in the community. One is, why didn't the city appeal its regional housing needs allocation? And so in June of this year, the city council did not opt to file an appeal of Piedmont's RHNA allocation of 587 housing units. And this was based on the city staff's recommendation not to file an appeal for several key reasons. But on the whole, staff determined that a successful appeal would be highly unlikely and that our efforts would be better spent on facilitating the development of housing. Staff had already submitted 7 letters to ABAG and the California HCD expressing the city's concerns about the methodology used in developing the RHNA. And the vast majority of appeals filed in the Los Angeles and San Diego regions were denied. And so that wasn't a very good precedent. Also, the allocations are not based on a city's capacity to supply housing or its environmental constraints. Instead, the allocations are based on the city's estimated share of the Bay Area region's projected population in 2050. And so staff's determination that an appeal would be unsuccessful was proved pretty correct. ABAG's administrative committee denied all 28 appeals submitted by local ABAG jurisdictions, with the one exception of the appeal submitted by the County of Contra Costa. And in that case, that appeal was granted partially because the area that was thought to be in Contra Costa County, unincorporated Contra Costa County, was actually in Pittsburgh. So the question number 2 that we often hear is, does the RHNA or housing element oblige the city to build housing? And the answer to that is no. Cities are not required to build or initiate housing projects. Rather than that, though, the city is required to ensure that the zoning capacity exists to build the housing. And the third frequently asked question, and there's a lot more frequently asked questions on a list we maintain at piedmontishome.org. But the third one here is, when do Piedmonters get the chance to vote on the housing element? We hear that sometimes. And actually, housing elements and general plans are not approved by a community-wide vote. We have a representative democracy. So Piedmont City Council, as the elected governing body of the community, has the authority and responsibility to adopt the housing element. So that was just a few things we wanted to address that we hear a lot from the public. And with that, I'll hand it back.
Thank you, Kevin. And thank you, Catherine, for the great presentation. So as Catherine mentioned earlier, I'm just going to give us a very quick overview of the community engagement strategy that we have laid out for this project and what we've done to date and where we're headed. Ultimately, the goal is to reach as many different perspectives as we can throughout this process by implementing an outreach program that is extremely far-reaching. We really want you all as the community to take ownership of this process. We want to make sure that we continue to build relationships between members of the community and members of the city. The two-way communication is absolutely vital, and you'll see that everything we talk about here will be part of the summary. We want to make sure that everything is super transparent between the project team and you all as members of the community. We're going to use social media and other online platforms, but we'll also, you'll notice mailers and other type of tools that are going to come to you as well, just to make sure that everyone, again, has equal access. And we'll use survey tools at times as well. So for those that can't necessarily be at the meeting with us, we'll still have a chance to contribute in different ways. And including this meeting, the polling that we're doing will be available actually on the project website afterwards, so that folks can go on and actually give us input that way as well. Ultimately, we want to make sure it's very inclusive, and again, reaching all different members of the community and doing analytics throughout the process to course correct as needed. So the project website, which we're super proud of, is chock full of great information. Again, it's piedmontishome.org. It includes all the information, all the background information that you're hearing here tonight about the housing element. It includes all of the great FAQs that will continue to evolve throughout the process. It includes information about events that have happened and summaries from those events, and will include information about meetings that are upcoming. Informational videos is the key piece of that, feedback forms. There will be interactive mapping that you'll see pop up throughout the process, and it is accessible in multiple languages, which is key. You've heard about the informational videos a few times. We have 5 videos up there now, ranging from introductions to housing basics and components. We really encourage you to go to the project website and view those. A lot of great information to access. We do have a range of engagement activities planned. Obviously, these community workshops are one of them, but there's also the Housing Advisory Committee meetings. There'll be focus group meetings. There'll be public hearings, clearly, but then there'll be other online engagement activities as well that we'll implement throughout the process, again, to make sure that we reach all voices that want to be part of the process. And just a quick snapshot of where we are in the process currently. We're definitely very early on during the data collection phase and some of the information phase, sharing phase. You'll see here as at workshop 1, we do have a host of other meetings and workshops planned, including another workshop coming up next year. And then there's the HAC or Housing Advisory Committee meetings. There's 4 of those planned as well throughout the process, with the hope of reaching planned adoption somewhere in the spring of 2023. So this is a very early in the process, and there'll be many, many more opportunities to contribute. And just really quickly, in terms of community input to date, there was a survey that was put out in April of 2021 that got an amazing response. There's been different community events that have held related to housing. We have held some focus group meetings with these groups that you see here. All of the information was posted to the project website as well. And there was a joint PC and Housing Advisory Committee meeting that was held on September. And that information is also all on the project website for you to take a look at. So please go there at piedmontishome.org, and you'll get to engage with all that great information. Just a quick snapshot of what we've heard to date from the focus group meetings. Folks mentioned that Piedmont is very expensive, which impacts the overall population and who can live in Piedmont. The housing element, folks thought should consider multiple sites and mixed types of housing to avoid segregation. There's a lot of sentiment around affordable housing for low-income residents, recognizing the cost of housing, and a great need to partner with with neighboring and regional organizations to kind of help bring that housing to fruition, but then also recognize that additional housing does also impact things like schools with limited capacity, and that's something that should also be considered. So this is just a quick snapshot of input that we've received as state that we just want to report back to you, and this will continue to grow, obviously, with the great information that we'll gather through conversations with you all here tonight and subsequent meetings. So with that, I am going to hand it back over to Catherine, and then after Catherine's presentation, we're going to do one more quick poll and then launch into the small group discussion to hear from you all. So back over to you, Catherine.
Great, thanks, Dave. And just a quick reminder, we do have a little bit of time set aside for some big picture Q&A before we do a breakout session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the chat to Pierce Powell McDonald. Okay, so as I alluded to earlier, there are several required components of a housing element, and these analyses provide the basis for the development of the housing element, including goals, policies, and programs. So on the next slide, please. And then one more. So I'll be going through some preliminary findings from the housing needs and constraints analysis tonight. But you can see that there's other components that are required for every housing element. The needs analysis looks at the characteristics of people in Piedmont, and it's related to the type of housing that is needed. Constraints look at possible factors both within and outside of the city's control that affect the development of housing in Piedmont. So to give a snapshot, Piedmont has been growing pretty slowly, adding only 500 people over the past 20 years. This is a rate of growth about 4.6%. It's considerably lower than the rate of growth for both the county and the Bay Area region as a whole, which is closer to 30% growth over that same period. At the same time, however, the community is aging. The average age in Piedmont is over 47 years old, almost 10 years older than the average age of Alameda County at 38 years. And this trend continues. This influences the type of housing and housing related services that the city should plan for. Should plan for, since older populations have different needs and trends than younger groups. For example, an older population may begin retiring, transitioning to smaller homes, or need supportive housing settings, and maybe need to live closer to services. Whereas a younger population may indicate a need for housing for new families, students, or young adults. Just to note, the demographic information that we're going to go through tonight is available on the project website and the workshop event page. So now back into the findings. Income classifications are based on the relationship of a household total combined income compared to that of the county average. So because of this, income limits vary based on household size. So Piedmont is an affluent community comprised of mostly really high income earners. The average household in Piedmont makes more than double that of the average household in Alameda County. However, 14% of Piedmonters are considered very low or low income, with 534 households earning less than 80% of the county average. That means 534 households in Piedmont, if they were households of three, earn between $37,000 and $99,000 a year. Next slide, please. Housing is also very expensive in Piedmont. Not a surprise to probably many of you. The median home values in Piedmont are also more than double that of the Bay Area as a whole, with the average household value in Piedmont in 2020 at $2.4 million. Based on a standard assumption that housing is relatively affordable, if the household spends no more than 30% of their total combined income on housing costs, including utilities, the average $2.4 million home would not be affordable to the average household earning $250,000 a year. So even at earning more than double the county median incomes, the average Piedmont household can only afford approximately a $1.3 million household with 20% down, and that's depending on terms of the mortgage, of course, which is $1 million short of affordability with the average home value. On the flip side, those Piedmonters earning less than 80% of the county average, like elementary school teachers, legislators, and civil and engineer technicians, can only afford housing with home prices of less than $500,000. which is far from the average $2.4 million home in Piedmont. So knowing this, next slide, please. It's not hard to see why 90% of lower income households, those are the households earning less than $100,000 a year, are cost burdened. They spend more than 30% of their household income on housing costs, and several of them spend more than 50% of their housing, or 50% of their income on rent or mortgages. This puts these households at risk for housing insecurity if they cannot maintain their payments, their rents, their mortgages due to any unforeseen financial hardships like illness or a global pandemic. Since cost burden is relative to the household income and housing costs, it's often an invisible burden and can affect anyone in Piedmont with any profession and in any housing type. Being cost burden isn't limited to only lower income groups. 1/5 of all Piedmonters, which is over 1,000 households, are overpaying for housing. HCD classifies certain populations as special needs groups because they may have more unique housing related challenges than an average city household. So what is considered special needs includes groups like seniors, single parent households and persons living in poverty, large families, which is more than 5 persons in a household, and the homeless. These groups are present in Piedmont and face additional burden related to housing affordability. For example, lower income seniors are more cost burdened than upper income counterparts. Female-headed households with children are more likely to live in poverty than 2-parent households or households without children. And there are 245 households in Piedmont living below the poverty line. So in order to address these needs, the city will need to encourage housing that serves these groups, particularly through more housing options generally, and especially through housing affordable to lower income households. So providing more housing options is challenging under existing land use policy and regulations. The city is mostly built out with very little vacant land dedicated for residential, and a vast majority of land is reserved for single family homes. Given the high cost of homes in Piedmont, this product type is unlikely to serve the need for lower income groups or those who are cost burdened. Multifamily may be a more affordable alternative. However, there are very few sites which allow multifamily or mixed use projects. That's the zoomed in box there is majority of the area in Piedmont that does allow any sort of multifamily or mixed use product types. On the next slide, you'll see that where the city does allow multifamily and mixed use, the regulations make projects difficult to develop. Extra review in Zone D, limits on density to 21 units an acre are factors that can deter interested developers and add cost and delays to approvals or make projects infeasible to develop given market conditions, which I'll talk about in just a minute. In a technical sense, the city's regulations don't explicitly allow for certain housing types that are protected under state law. And the next slide lists that the city will need to update the code to clearly show city alignment with an allowance with these certain housing types, such as emergency shelters and traditional housing. And finally, although it's not under the city's control, the housing element does look at market conditions. Understanding what is happening in the housing market can help inform recommendations to counteract negative market forces. For example, development incentives, partnerships, land cost write-downs, or density bonuses. So in Piedmont, project costs, well, in general, project costs are primarily made up of land costs and the cost of construction. In Piedmont and in much of Alameda County and the Bay Area, these two factors require that rents or sales prices are greater than what can be afforded by households earning less than 80% of the median. So the lower income households in Piedmont don't have the rent available or cost affordable to support this product development. This means that the private market cannot profitably provide affordable units without assistance. This assistance can take the form of extra density or extra units or reduction in land costs, which is often uncommon in public jurisdictions. Other common methods of reducing costs to make housing more affordable include having the affordable units built by a nonprofit housing developer who can take advantage of federal tax benefits to build affordable housing. This produces a lower cost structure when compared to for-profit development. And Piedmont's not unique in this circumstance. It's really a regional, a county, and a statewide issue. Project construction costs are largely determined by the regional labor market and cost of materials, and they're generally consistent market-wide. Piedmont does have a higher land cost than other parts of the region, which is primarily due to the factors that make Piedmont enticing for development and attractive to people looking to live in Piedmont. Location and other amenities that make the community desirable. But these land costs can be a significant impediment to the production of affordable housing. So I'm going to pass it back to Dave and Kevin to talk about some Q&A.
Great, thank you so much, Catherine. So we have had a few questions come in through chat that we are currently sifting our way through. Kevin, is there any that you would want to address off the top? And then I might ask either Catherine or David to help answer a couple others.
Yeah, there was a question about sharing the link to the article that Ronnie Batra mentioned earlier, and that's in the chat. And then after this meeting, we'll provide that on the Piedmonters Home website. And then also there was a question about providing comments that are from open-ended, and all during this process, people can certainly submit comments to Piedmonters Home at piedmont.ca.gov. That information is on the Piedmonters Home website as well, and we're happy to respond to those as an ongoing process and to help you understand the issues at hand. There was also some questions that came in regarding how income is figured, and I'm going to hand that off to either Catherine or David.
Happy to answer the question how income is determined. It's at the household level. Usually the data that we work off of comes from something called the American Community Survey, which is run by the Census Bureau. They do a survey, and from that there's estimation techniques they apply to the city as a whole. They do it in 1 year and 5 year increments. So the source of the data that we use in this report is that American Community Survey data set.
Thank you, David. And then finally, there was a question about someone who's retired but owns their own home, and how does the affordability picture look if it excludes income from homeowners who own outright their residence? Yeah, the information is really about, and correct me if I'm wrong, David, income of households, and it doesn't talk about whether you have wealth. That's a different kind of calculation, the wealth you have from home ownership versus the income you have from earnings.
Right. It's not a overall picture of net assets, but annual income from all sources, including Social Security, pensions, retirement funds, all that kind of stuff.
I think that captures what we saw coming in.
Great, thanks so
certainly
much.
if somebody feels that they didn't get their question answered, certainly we can follow up with that following this meeting.
Yes, thank you so much, Kevin. And we are going to get into small groups here in a bit, and the great opportunity there as well to pose any additional questions. And then again, we'll include any questions we receive within the summary so we can report back with you all on those. So with that, we're back to our fun Mentee poll again. I'm hoping you all are already on there, have access to it. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing screen again here for a second. Just a reminder for those that might have joined after we did the first poll, if you go to mentee.com and type in 74596324, that could be on a separate screen, a laptop where you're using, and or on your phone. And if you are on your phone, you could also use the QR code here by bringing your camera up to it, and it'll take you directly to the website. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing screen so that I could bring that poll back up. Thank you all for your patience. Let's see. So if I bring this back up for us. Excellent. So All right, so now we're going to get into some additional questions before we launch into the small groups. We would love to get your input on some questions here, really diving a bit deeper into some of the critical housing issues in Piedmont. So again, what do you think are the most critical housing issues in Piedmont? We have a few options here we'd love to get your feedback on. And then again, when we get into the small groups, we'll have an opportunity to dive in a little bit deeper. But some of the responses include availability of housing, housing affordability, the rate and number of new housing units getting built, protections for renters facing displacement or discrimination, fair housing or equal housing access or opportunity, the concentration or oppositely the segregation of certain groups, and then financial assistance for down payment, home repairs, renovations, or constructions of accessory dwelling units or ADUs. So again, here you can choose as many as you think do apply, and it looks like housing affordability in general has gotten a lot of support, as well as availability of housing and the rate and number of new housing getting built. Great, so we're gonna actually capture, I'm gonna ask Paul to take a quick snapshot of this, and we'll capture the responses we received here, and you'll see this pop up again in the small group discussion as well to help kind of spur that conversation. One other question I would like to ask as well is what do you think are the housing types that are most needed in Piedmont? And again, you could click as many as you think apply here. We have a few options of housing affordable to low income households or to moderate income households, or fair for sale housing, excuse me, rental housing, senior housing, condos or townhomes, duplexes or triplexes, housing with accessibility features for people with disabilities, housing and or services for unhoused people, and housing for young families. So as you can see here, it looks like there's equal distribution throughout the list, but it looks like condos, townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, housing affordable to moderate incomes, housing for young families, everything's gotten a fair number of votes. So again, this is something that we'd love to dive in a little bit deeper with you as we launch into the small group. So this is great information for us to be aware of. And again, I'll ask Paul to take a quick snapshot of this, and this will be available in the small groups as we launch into those. Excellent. Okay, so lastly, I wanted to ask this question, and then there'll be a couple other questions in the small groups that we'll hope to dive into. But this is asking, when assessing new housing that might be built in Piedmont in the next 8 to 10 years, what should be the city's most important consideration? So this ranges from energy efficiency to new buildings designed to appear consistent with neighboring homes, protection of access to significant views, privacy, noise, and screening, historical buildings and landmarks, on-site amenities for new residents, like decks and play areas, walkability to schools, businesses, and services, maintaining high-quality citywide services and facilities, such as police, fire, parks, and recreation, and then traffic and parking. And again, we realize this list isn't exhaustive. We'll have a chance to dive in deeper in the small groups, but great to initially get a quick snapshot from you all. And it looks like you're definitely interested in maintaining high quality citywide services, energy efficiency, walkability, new buildings that are designed to be consistent with neighboring homes. Excellent privacy, noise screening, great. And traffic and parking looks like got quite a few votes as well. Protection of views. Okay, this is really, really great information for us to have again as we now launch into the small group discussion. So Paul, again, I'll give you a second to take a quick snapshot of this as I stop sharing my screen. Excellent. Thank you all again for indulging us and taking that quick poll. So with that, I already have the room set up. We really want to encourage you all to stick with us here as we jump into the small groups. I'm going to bring the screen back up here real quickly. All right, all welcome back for those that are starting to venture back in. We're going to wait just a minute here, let folks trickle back in from the other rooms before we do a quick report out. So welcome back. Thank you all again for sticking with us. Looks like the majority of folks stuck around, which is great to see. Maybe that raffle was enticing enough to keep you around, or hopefully it was the great conversation. I do know we had a great conversation in our room or our group. I'm going to wait just 10 more seconds here, make sure that everyone is able to get back here to the main room. Looks like we have. Okay, great. So as promised earlier, we're now going to do a very quick round robin report out of the great discussions we had in the 3 rooms. And I'm going to ask each of the lead facilitators to just give us a brief 2 or 3 minute overview of the key themes of what came out of your discussion. And then if anyone else has anything else to add, feel free. And then we'll talk a little about next steps and hopefully get you on the road here close to 7 or maybe a couple minutes after. So with that, Catherine, I'm going to turn it over to you to do a quick recap of our room, and then we'll get the others. So over to you.
Thanks, Dave. So thanks to everyone who participated in our conversation. I know it's sometimes hard to speak in a small group, but I really appreciate your thoughts and sentiments. So we talked through all the comments and questions. We really seemed, a lot of what came up today was that affordability, availability, and rate of housing production in Piedmont are really interrelated. That if you have slow growth of housing, it can become unaffordable, and there may be unavailable housing, which also then drives up the price. That this also has an impact on, well, I guess ultimately there's no housing choices in Piedmont. There's not a lot of housing choice, so there's not a lot of diversity. And there is, the folks in the group, they wanted to live in a diverse community. They wanted to, have their kids grow up with diversity. But what drew them to Piedmont, and there was a lot of agreement here, is that the services in Piedmont are really key. They're pivotal. That's why people want to move to Piedmont if they don't live here now, and it's why people move to Piedmont to raise their families and to then continue to live in Piedmont. But there was some sentiment that if the community continues to stunt growth and it continues to age, that may have an impact on services. So while there may be concern that growth has an impact on the ability to continue to provide great services, that the opposite may be true if the city does not continue to accommodate growth, accommodating new families and accommodating those who want to continue to support and fund the services, the employment and other services in the city. And the last sentiment was that housing or households come in all shapes and sizes. There's houses that have 1 parent, 2 parents, some children, many children, no children, grandparents, cousins. They all live together. You don't really know who's living in your community. There's a lot of different shapes and sizes, and they all live in different housing types. You can have a family living in an ADU. You can have, empty nesters living in a house. The housing type doesn't necessarily indicate the type of person that is going to move into your community. But we do need to think about different housing types to accommodate different household types.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. It looks like we might go just a couple minutes past 7, so I really appreciate everyone's patience. But we definitely want to hear from the other 2 groups as well before we close. So Kevin, if you're ready, actually, I'm going to go to you next.
Sure. Thank you, Dave. And actually, Claire Parissa is going to report back from our group session.
Excellent.
Go ahead, Claire.
Great. Yeah. So we had a really great conversation. A lot of our conversation sort of centered on the last two questions, but I'll go through the first ones as well. One thing that we talked about is that the sort of different housing types and wishes that folks have are not mutually exclusive, right? We can accomplish all of these things. It's not going to be just ADUs or just duplexes or just multifamily. There's space for all of those housing types. We also talked about the value of adding more ADUs to our community, but that unfortunately ADUs alone are not going to get us there, that we'll probably have to build multifamily affordable housing. And that in order to do that, we'll need to identify sites. And we talked a little bit about the process for that we'll maybe have more of an idea on that in March or April. We also discussed a little bit about the importance of making sure that any housing that is built, especially multifamily housing, has access to services and transit, which doesn't necessarily mean that it can only go in a couple places, but that, you know, some sites may have more access to services and transit than others, and that should be an important conversation and consideration. And then finally, we had some really great ideas for how to engage the community more. So Vanessa in our group came up with an idea, and maybe she'll be our very first housing ambassador. So getting, you know, her neighborhood interested, engaged in the process. We also talked a little bit about getting the high school students involved and their parents, maybe through an after school club or through civics class. And then finally, the potential to do a charrette where we do a sort of all day or partial day session with sort of interactive pieces with all sorts of community members from all sorts of perspectives and focusing not on just if we should meet RHNA, but how we can meet RHNA. Moving around little Monopoly houses on a big map of Piedmont, something like that. So it was a really great conversation. I'm looking forward to continuing. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Claire. That was a great recap. Excuse me. So last but not least, we're going to go to David Bergman and his group.
Thank you. So there was a consensus among members of our group that Piedmont has a responsibility to address issues of housing inequality, income inequality, and access to housing in the community. There was a request that the city not take a technocratic approach, but rather think outside the box and to be as creative as possible in finding ways to accommodate new housing in Piedmont. There was concern about the school district, and we had a good conversation about the implications actually of adding more households with children present, school-age children present, is actually supportive of the school district and not a source of stress or strain on the school district. That seems to be a critical factor or component of the community's identity and what are perceived as the advantages of living in Piedmont. There was an opinion expressed that aesthetics should not be the main focus. We shouldn't worry about making things pretty. At the same time, there was a concern about high-rise development and trying to discourage high-rise development. Another issue that was expressed was being careful not to prioritize non-residential development in either mixed-use development or at commercial sites, and to find ways to recycle those sites, in particular the bank sites, as housing opportunities. Finally, there was a comment about the overconsumption of housing in an aging population, particularly in Upper Piedmont, and were there any opportunities for the city to enact policies that would help reestablish filtering of housing?
Excellent. Thank you so much. Sounds like some fantastic conversations in all the groups. Lots of overlap and interesting similarities as well that we will definitely report back out on as we put together the summary for the meeting. So with that, thank you again for all that, for your time here tonight. I'm going to hand it back over to Catherine to talk a little bit about next steps before we close the meeting. So Catherine, back over to you.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks. I really like hearing everyone's diverse thoughts. And I really do appreciate that that group had some ideas on engagement. That's always really helpful and good to hear. So next steps, real brief, stay tuned, keep involved. As we noted during the presentation, there's a lot to come. This is the first public engagement, public-wide engagement opportunity. There was the PC Housing Advisory Committee meeting back in September, but this project will run through the entirety of 2022 and into the spring of 2023. So keeping involved, stay tuned on the project website, piedmontershome.org. Informational videos are a great resource, meeting summaries, and the city's e-bulletin, which will always apprise Piedmonters and any interested party about upcoming events and opportunities to provide input. We are looking towards and targeting release of a draft of the housing element for public review in the spring of next year, late spring of next year. And we'll have lots more workshops and lots of opportunities to go through and dig into the details, the recommendations. You'll see how the community has, or how the city and the consultant team has responded to and incorporated all of the input that we are gathering and will continue to gather. And I will turn it either back to Dave Javid or to Pierce or Kevin for closing, to close out the meeting.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody who attended. I think this has been really valuable, and obviously we'll have more of these workshops and public meetings and engagement events coming up. And this gets us started on that. But I'll close with the raffle. We had 58 total participants this evening. I'm going to thank Pierce McDonald for running this and using Google Authenticator to randomly draw a number. The winner of the $50 raffle prize to Grand Lake Ace Hardware is Kimberly Moses. All right, congratulations, Kimberly. Thank you so much for attending. And with that, we'll go ahead and sound the gavel and close this meeting. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you all. Have a great night.
Have a good night.